Hello, and welcome to the Women's Health Summit. My name is Linda Henry, and I am so excited about our conversation today on prioritizing your care because we have the best possible expert to lead us on this, Dr. Jennifer Ashton. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Linda.
You may recognize Dr. Jen as ABC's News Chief Health and Medical Correspondent. As part of the ABC News Medical Unit, she reports on major health and wellness issues across all of ABC News platforms. She also reports on the latest breaking medical news for the two-time Emmy-nominated show GMA3, What You Need to Know. Dr. Ashton has been at the forefront of the ABC News COVID-19 coverage, which has really been a comfort to all of America. She has been visiting with the NIH vaccine department lab, the CDC, the White House, meeting with VP Pence and the White House coronavirus response coordinator Dr. Deborah Birx. Dr. Ashton has also interviewed the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases Director, Dr. Anthony Fauci, as well as Dr. Rochelle Walensky. She is double board certified in OBGYN and obesity medicine. She has a master's degree in nutrition, making her the only physician with a national media platform who is also credentialed in nutrition. She has a medical degree from Columbia University, and she is a nationally best-selling author with 6 books, the most recent being the fantastic The New Normal, which I highly recommend. And on top of all of these incredible accomplishments, she is gorgeous fun, and I know her as a loving and very generous friend. Jen, thank you so much for leading us on this today.
Hi, Linda. Thanks for leading this conversation. This is a real treat.
So you have been an expert voice and influential advocate on so many health and wellness issues. Why do you think it's so important that this really great women's conference starts with self-care?
Well, I think that, first of all, it's targeted to women, but we also have to include any men that may care about the women who are listening to this conference. They have a place in this important discussion, obviously, as well. But I think that, one thing that we've all learned either personally or nationally or even globally over the last 2+ years in the pandemic is that, at the end of the day and the beginning of the day, actually, we can't rely on anyone else to help us in terms of our health if we don't take the first steps. That doesn't mean those levels of assistance shouldn't exist. They should, and they should work, but that's a whole other topic for another discussion. But I think that sense of personal responsibility for our overall health and wellness was really driven home over the last 2+ years. And I think that a lot of us saw what can happen when, that foundation is not strong. Who would have expected us to be living through 2+ years of what we've all been living through? And I think that, I really started and continue to look at this through the lens and eyes of a physician. And whether we're talking about ourselves as individuals or our collective national health and wellness, I think a lot of the principles still apply, which is that, you have to turn that lens on yourself first before you can help anyone else.
And so what are the fundamentals of self-care? And I know that you wrote this really great book that helps sort of your own journey in discovering it. And so what would you define as sort of the basic tenets of self-care?
Well, I think there are a lot of different ways to look at that, obviously. But, for some historical perspective, I think you and I are both, of the age where we remember the term self-help, right? And that was kind of very trendy 10, 20 years ago. I mean, you were probably still a teenager then, but I was, I have 10 years on you. So I definitely remember that became a whole section in bookstores, the self-help section. And I think that was kind of the 1.0 generation of this movement. Now the term self-care really is the 2.0 of that. Self-help implies there's a problem, right? We need to fix it. And self-care really, in my mind, is let's start and meet you where you are. maybe you're doing really well, maybe you need help, maybe you're somewhere in the middle, but it's the care part of it, which is kind of more objective and to me sounds a little less judgmental. But to be clear, it's more than a staycation, it's more than a semi spa day. It really starts with assessing your physical and mental well-being on a regular basis, and then providing what I think are the fundamentals to assure that at baseline, you're not just keeping your head above water, but really doing as well as you possibly can be doing.
I love that that description of calling it self-help 2.0, where it is self-care and why it's called self-care. And I also like what you're saying, that it's not something that you can like cram and do it one day, right? It's about, and I think that was one of the great takeaways from your book, is that it's consistency. It's showing up and sort of saying, okay, this is a commitment that I have, and this is what I'm going to do day after day. And really helpfully in your reporting and you're advocating for this, you've talked about the trifecta of self-care. Can you explain what that is?
Well, I named it that because it has three pillars, which is, your body needs three things on a daily basis, not regular, daily. It needs rest and good rest. So that's under the sleep kind of rest category. It needs good fuel. And so I hate the 4-letter D word, diet. I like to call it fuel. I like to call it, good nutrition, food as medicine. I just think that's a more positive way to frame what we put in our bodies. So are you filling your tank with the right kind of nutrients to not just get you through a day, but to really elevate your level of health and wellness? And then your body needs to move. And how we practice our fitness routines will obviously be different for everybody, but I want to be clear, your body has to do something. When it doesn't, it will start to hurt. It's just a matter of when and how much. So for me, those things are all on par with each other. It's not that food comes first and then fitness or vice versa. They are all equally important and necessary and essential to safeguard our physical and our mental well-being. But the unfortunate thing, Linda, is that we have a very kind of reactive philosophy about health and wellness in this country, as you know. In the Western world, we would rather treat something than prevent it. And I think the onus of responsibility for that really is shared by everyone. Yes, it's, part of it comes from my profession, the medical profession, who finds it easier, unfortunately, to just write a prescription for something than to take the time to really walk someone through the steps that they need to be taking. And if they're not taking, figure out why. But the onus of responsibility is also on the lay public, or by the way, physician public. It doesn't have to be a lay person to say, that stuff is just, it sounds like so much work. Wouldn't it just be easier if you could just write a prescription? And the answer to that is, yeah, it would be easier, but that is not actually, in my medical opinion, the best way to go about it. So those three things, the trifecta, I feel are so important that when I see an actual patient in my medical practice, if they have any issues, that is where I start. And until those things are on lock, I am pretty reluctant to then start going to the prescriptions or the fancy tests, because that is how important they are.
Eating well, sleeping, and moving your body. And there's a lot more once you get, so that's sort of like for you, where you call it the trifecta, like that's the baseline for what you're saying of people need. And then there's additional things that you've been recommending in your books and on ABC of you've talked a lot about meditating and how that's been beneficial to you. And that's really been something that you've adopted as a form of self-care. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Have you ever tried meditating?
I have my mantra, but I'm not consistent about doing it.
That's okay. I mean, I can't believe you and I haven't talked about that yet, but I also have a mantra, and I am also less consistent than I would like. However, it dovetails into why and how it's so important to integrate our mental health and our physical health. You know, you can't have a healthy body without a healthy mind and spirit, and vice versa. So, they go hand in hand. Unfortunately, I think, again, in Western culture, we tend to, draw a line, like a dotted line from the neck up, and then, we're better at looking at the body from the neck down. But in terms of meditation, it was an interesting kind of personal revelation for me, because I think it's almost 10 years, maybe it's 8 years or so now, that I first learned. I practice transcendental meditation, but there's so many kinds of mindfulness. And it's just about finding what you like, and what works on your day-to-day schedule and routine. But at the time where I was introduced to TM and meditation, I was guilty of exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about now, which is, I was only focused on my physical well-being. And so I was making sure that I was doing cardio and lifting weights and watching what I ate, and getting enough sleep, 7 to 8 hours every single night, despite my insane work schedule and 4 to 5 a.m. wake-up calls. And I was so smug about that. I thought, like, this is so great. I finally found the way to do it myself and not just talk about it. And then I realized that the 800-pound gorilla in the room was that I was not addressing anything in terms of my mental wellness. And so I had met a couple of people that swore by meditation, and finally it was just like, the pecking little bird on my shoulder, and I said, okay, this is the sign. I have to learn. And I learned. I tried it for 2 weeks, and my kids, because you and I know as moms, when your kids hold up a mirror to you, that sometimes is all you need to hear, right? I mean, my kids will often tell me, can you get off your phone? And when your kids tell you to get off your phone, not only is it embarrassing, but it tends to be quite impactful. But after that 2 weeks, my kids saw a difference in me. And I said, what do you notice? And they said, well, you're just, kind of more relaxed, less stressed. And I said, was I stressed before? I didn't know. And so I think that, if I could write a prescription for meditation for our mental health and well-being, I would. That is how powerful I think it is. And I will tell you, I don't know why I'm inconsistent with it, because when I meditate 20 minutes, 15 minutes, guaranteed, not most of the time, not some of the time, guaranteed, I will be in a more positive mood. I will be mentally more efficient, sharper, more energetic. It gives me a feeling that I've added time to my day. And I think everyone should do it. That's how powerful I think it is.
It's a great endorsement. And I think that one of the reasons why it's one of the ones to be tougher to be consistent with is because you physically feel the results of moving and the results of sleeping. And to be honest, by the time, if you have a schedule like yours, by the time you drink all of the water you're supposed to drink, you meditate, you exercise, you practice yoga, you practice your gratitude, you sleep 8 hours, you stretch, that's a day.
That's right. Yeah, you're right. It is so hard, but I would actually argue, especially for women, with all of the multitasking that we do, which I actually believe we're evolutionarily programmed to multitask. And there is some science that backs that up, that if we do these things, we will actually be more efficient. And that is the holy grail, right? For any woman or man, but certainly for any woman, to be more efficient. Who wouldn't want that? And I really do believe that if we do all these things, we'll be so much better at everything that ultimately and eventually will be easier to do those things.
I think that's great. And so just to clarify, I was sort of joking about all of the elements that go into really great, what we know to be really great self-care. Is it selfish?
I think it's the antithesis of selfish actually. I think that for most women, you know, we feel like it's selfish if we say, actually, I have to decline, or actually, I can't do that. I have to take this time for myself. As I say in one of my books, no one will die if dirty laundry gets left in the hamper or a dish gets left in the sink, before we go to sleep. That is, you can't say that about everything, but you can say it about those things. So we have to put ourselves first. But the real reason for that, and this is non-judgmental. It's not bad. It's not good. This is the reality, is that because of how our minds are programmed with all of the other roles that we balance in our lives, with our family, with our friends, with our partners, with our jobs, with our communities, if we don't practice self-care, we will not be good at those things. And if we really care so much about all those things and roles and responsibilities, which we do, the best way to execute them at a high level is to practice self-care. And, for me, that is an incredibly real kind of, I'm confronted with it on a daily basis. If I do not get adequate sleep, I can't speak well. And millions of people listen to me on Good Morning America and watch me every day for the latest on COVID, or, discussing the latest study. And the stakes are too high, for me to make a mistake if I'm saying the wrong thing. And, that's what happens if I don't get enough sleep. And when I see patients, they're seeing me once a year. They don't want the tired and forgetful Dr. Jennifer Ashton. That's how I look at it. I think it's the opposite of selfish.
So it's a way, and again, it's like, it's the consistency, it's the investment in order to show up, bring your best self, to take care of your family, to show up for your job and for all of your responsibilities. And that ties into this idea of overall, you cannot put, especially women, put their health needs last. You're actually not helping. The martyr thing isn't helping anyone.
No, it's not. And, we now have some data on what's happened to women in particular during the last 2 years of the pandemic. And just as we've learned that certain races and ethnic groups, certain parts of the country have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic, so too have women with disproportionately increased risk in many mental issues like anxiety, depression. Men have increased rates of that also, but not as high as women. Women, of course, making the brunt of their decisions for their household in a situation of significant economic uncertainty. And then when you look at women all over the world with how this pandemic has affected them, we need to care about that. We typically take an insular view in this country of, what's going on here? What do I have to worry about? What's going on with women in the United States? Make no mistake, what is happening to women and girls in Africa and other parts of the world where they have been literally amputated from leaving their homes to go to school, and all of the domino effects that this pandemic has brought on that go along with that, an increase in sexual violence, an increase in maternal mortality, which was already in a bad way before the pandemic because reproductive health services were interrupted or completely disappeared. That affects us. That affects us on many levels. So I think that, you have to look at this differently. Yes, it's something that has affected everyone, but its effects on women and girls really need a specialized and targeted approach.
And so what are some of the latest information that we have on some of the big women's health issues? Is there anything I know, the pandemic, as you're talking about, sort of really brought to light mental health.
Yeah.
Is there anything within mental health or other areas that you think that we should be talking about?
Well, I think that the one thing that I always say, I'll retire from medicine when I feel satisfied that women everywhere know this. And sadly, for both my prospects for retiring and more importantly for women, it's still something that women say, oh, I didn't know that. And it's just an example of how access to information doesn't always equate to using that information in a way that helps you move the needle. But heart disease and its link to reproductive women's health issues has been really on the medical horizon for the last 5 to 8 years. So what do I mean by that? I mean, there are a list of very common OBGYN conditions that affect anywhere from 8 to 25% of women that are now considered in the world of cardiology and heart disease a risk factor, a failed stress test for heart disease. You know, this is about one hand talking to the other. So I'm talking about things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, gestational diabetes or diabetes during pregnancy, having a preterm delivery, having problems with the placenta or a fetus or a baby that's small for the stage in pregnancy that a woman delivers. Those are almost, you can think of them almost the same way as high blood pressure, high cholesterol, smoking, obesity. We know now that those increase a woman's risk for heart disease later in life. So I've been trying to raise attention to OBGYNs to talk to cardiology colleagues, which in my family should be easy because my father is a cardiologist. And if we have some very boring dinner table conversation when we get together and he'll say, oh, I didn't know that. And I'll go, oh, if you don't know it, Dad, we're in trouble. But this is something that any woman or man who's listening to our conversation right now can say, talk to your gynecologist at your next well woman checkup and say, do I have PCOS or did I have diabetes in pregnancy? And what do I need to know about how to use that information to lower my risk for heart disease? Because Linda, if we had another woman in this conversation with us, one of us will die of heart disease. And guess what? No one thinks it's them, right? You and I are probably saying, well, that's not going to be me. But that is the number one cause of death for men and women in the country and in the world. And so I love the concept of one specialty getting on board with another, but this is truly, in my opinion, the definition of holistic care, right? It's not about treating a body part, it's about treating the whole person. And more women need to know about this, more cardiologists need to know about it so that our daughters and us cannot become a statistic.
And this is all part of prioritizing your care of, nutrition, sleep, exercise, like that. That's sort of the basics. But then this is all looking after your overall women's health issues. Yep. Is such an important part of that as well. What is something that women today, and actually I do want to pause on one thing, and I think that you've been very good about talking about this. Where we say that women are not practicing self-care and putting their own health needs last. And I've heard you talk about how this is something that men do as well. Women sort of, and you could sort of go over the numbers and whatnot, but it's not a gendered issue. It's more of a society issue where there is so much emphasis on sort of what you can outwardly see in terms of output and performance that self-care gets neglected on men. So how do we help the men in our lives?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned it in that way because like any issue that tends to be described as a male issue or a female issue, it's really a human being issue, right? Because as I like to say when I talk about women's health topics on the air, that's not just talking to an audience who happens to have ovaries. Many men know at least one woman that they care about. I would bet it's every man, right? Has a sister, a mother, an aunt, a wife, a daughter, a cousin, a friend, someone, right? So I think it is important, as much as we like to and need to look individually at certain vulnerable groups and target and personalize our approaches, there are some things that really do cut across all those lines, and self-care is a big one. And look, there are sweeping generalizations that we make and often joke about, in an effort to bring some levity into a conversation that, look, we do as women, as moms, tend to put ourselves last. But men, if you want to generalize, tend to be very stubborn. And so, okay, we're both guilty, and now we need to just move forward and do something about it. And I think, the best way is to really, this is something that for some people is scary, for some people is logistically difficult, for some people, they feel intimidated or judged, or embarrassed, or any of those things. As that joke goes, ain't nobody got time for that. We just have to move on and, and ask someone to be your accountability partner, whoever that is, and say, look, I've been putting this off. I really need help, but I want to go and do A, B, or C. Will you help me? And if I go, maybe we could do it together. And I think that we just need to cut away any procrastination or excuses, or misconceptions, because we've learned in the last 2 years that, we have to be prepared for anything. And that means we have to prioritize our health and well-being.
I think what you brought up is a really great point. I've heard you talk about it, and I've seen you write about it as well, is this idea of the accountability aspect and sort of making the self-care a group project. And so that's why sort of if you have a brother, a son, whatever it is in your life that's a male, that's bring them along as part of this journey, in addition to bring women as sort of making it a thing, normalizing self-care, normalizing getting proper sleep in your household, and normalize, eating well and moving your body, sort of all of these things, making it a group initiative with that accountability helps. It's contagious in a way.
Yeah, I mean, think about all of the other things that peer pressure, is hard at work. And oftentimes we talk about peer pressure as connected to something that's negative. It could be positive, and if we all kind of made a pact to do that with our selected accountability partners, not only do I think our health would benefit, but also we're teaching our children and the people who really are looking at us, maybe through like a side glance, a side eye, I want to see what so-and-so is doing. I want to follow your lead. And we're setting a powerful example of, a way to elevate our wellness.
You talked as one of the things is a fuel. I want to talk, I know nutrition is such a deep subject, and you have such a level of expertise in it. And you've talked about the 4 S's of nutrition, and you're just such a great communicator that you give us all of these things that we can remember and take away. So can you talk to us about that?
I hope I remember the 4, but always say, I'll start with the first 3, which are, let me give you some background on that. When I went back to my alma mater to get my master's in nutrition, I did so because I would see on television, which is half my career, and as well in a real practice, how nutritionists and dietitians who know a ton about food would oftentimes be talking about disease states and wellness, and they don't have an MD after their name. They have not learned the same things. There is a little bit of overlap, but not even close to enough. Similarly, doctors would be talking about diet and weight, and I knew for a fact that we learned 0 nutrition in medical school. So I said, this is just not the way that, things should be. So I went back 3 years to get a master's in nutrition. And I was initially a little disappointed because I realized that the level of nutritional science is not where the level of medical science is, in terms of research and the rigor of the methodology behind a lot of studies. That doesn't stop the studies from coming out though, right? So when these studies come out, latest diet, lose this, lose that, you see it on TV, you see it in a magazine, you read a book about it. I want to be clear. Any diet can work short term. And short term could be a month, it could be a week, or it could be a year. The key is, and this goes to the 3 S's, is it sustainable, lifelong, and the 2-year mark is what the studies look at. Is it safe, right? Because there's plenty of unsafe diets out there. Things need to be safe. You don't want to trade one problem for another. And is it simple? So what was my 4th S? Safe, simple, and sustainable. Sexy? No, it doesn't. And I think that, and I think it has to work for you. There's no such thing as the miraculous. You and I try to eat pretty vegan most of the time with fish, but that works for us. For other people, paleo or Mediterranean or keto-ish might work. It just has to work for you. So 3 S's are my recommendation. If you remember what my 4th S is, let me know.
I'll be able to tell you in a few minutes. I can't remember at the top of my head, but it was just but the idea of it, again, you just have these really great messages of consistency and bringing this to your self-care of showing up. And it's, again, you're not going to do it in a week. You're not going to do it in a day. But if you're consistent in finding this plan, and you and I are mostly plant-based. And when you talk about, when you advise people on developing a way of eating, a fuel philosophy, you've talked about doing it gradually. Like, you don't have to start out and go from being an omnivore to being plant-based in a day. You can start by eliminating, which is what I had done. I had slowly eliminated each animal basically, until I was there, and it was it was less of a shock, and it was a more sustainable way of doing it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And also be curious and do an experiment in yourself. You're not tied to anything. You could always go back, but see how you feel, because at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter whether 80% of people achieve this. It matters what happens to you. So just look at it in a geeky scientific way, like I look at almost anything, and sometimes it'll be easier to do.
You also talk about which is really wonderful, is that you've really been normalized and made a lot of conversations okay and accessible. And you've talked about ways that you protect your mental health. We already talked about meditation and exercise, and those are 2 things that I think are really fundamental. What are some additional things that you would advise the women here to also do to protect their mental health?
I mean, I think that's a good way to kind of leave this conversation, although you and I could talk literally for hours. But, I did learn after the suicide death of my ex-husband and my children's father, and he was a physician and didn't have any of the overt signs of depression that we learn about in medical school. But of course, in looking back, as I blamed myself and asked, what did I miss? There were things that I think, in retrospect, were signs that he was struggling. So one of the other things that I do, and my children who are 22 and 23 do, is, we, first of all, have prioritized our mental wellness. And in exactly the same way as we would go to the dentist, who likes going to the dentist, right? I mean, maybe some people, but I'm not one of them. We check in with a therapist regularly, not just when we're struggling. And even though sometimes that seems unnecessary, we've signed up for that for the rest of our lives because of personal experience. But when you realize how many people struggle with anxiety and depression and have been affected by suicide, which is millions and millions of people, the importance of doing that, the checkup from the neck up, is really something that I think we all have to recognize. So asking for professional help, even though the access to that can be difficult for so many people, in some ways, again, with telemedicine and apps, it's kind of more accessible than it ever has been. It needs to be even better. But then I think the other thing that I do is recognize, acknowledge, and normalize when I'm not feeling great mentally, or, when I'm feeling stressed, when I'm feeling anxious. Not just keep your foot on the gas and keep going, but, I think what I've said to my patients, and now I say it to myself, is if I had high blood pressure, I would pay attention to it, and you would treat it. And so if you struggle with anxiety or depression or anything in the neck up realm, normalize it and ask for help. There is no shame in that. In fact, there's strength in that. And the last thing I would say is, we can do that with each other as well. And when we ask, how's someone doing, really stop and pump the brakes and wait for them to answer. Not just, hey, how you doing? Okay, next. But really, because that matters. So that's what I do. I'm certainly, still learning with that every single day, but I think, we can't improve something unless we at least acknowledge that it's there. And so mental health has become a priority to me and my family.
Dr. Jen, this has been a fantastic conversation. If you're interested in more about what she shared about recovering and handling, her book, Life After Suicide, is a really touching and an important read if you're doing with that. Her book, The New Normal, is her latest book, and it's about how are we adjusting, and it's really teaching you to think like a doctor in how to approach this new normal and not just look backwards. And her work on self-care was really well documented in this really fun read, where you learn that it really is self-care is something that it is important to prioritize. And we're really grateful for this summit for bringing it to light, but it is something that you have to do consistently. And there are incremental steps that you can do to really improve your health and wellness in order to be a better person for everyone around you. So thank you, Dr. Jem, for sharing this message and encouraging all of us to do better in prioritizing our own care.
Thank you, Linda. I could talk to you for hours, and thank you guys all for watching this, and to the 92nd Street Y for doing this summit. It is more necessary now than ever.